Rain fell steadily across the quiet suburban street, the kind of rain that softened everything except tension. Red and blue lights flickered against the wet pavement, stretching across the road in broken reflections. Outside the Vale home, movement was controlled, quiet, and urgent. A stretcher was wheeled out slowly, covered. Ethan Vale stood in the rain, unmoving, his eyes fixed on the doorway as if his mind refused to process what was happening in front of him. The voices around him blurred into distant noise. Instructions were being given. Questions were being asked. But none of it reached him. Above, on the second floor, two figures stood behind a window. Identical. Still. Watching. Earlier that same day, the house had felt different. Warm light filled the kitchen. The sound of soft morning routines, dishes, quiet footsteps, the low hum of everyday life. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming, just a family moving through another ordinary morning. Lila moved with ease, gentle and slightly distracted, her attention drifting between conversation and her own thoughts. There was something natural about her presence, something soft, reactive, human. Mara was different. She didn't drift. She observed everything. The way people moved, the rhythm of speech, the patterns in behavior. She noticed things others didn't, and she remembered them. That night, something shifted. At first, it was subtle, a sound, movement that didn't belong. Lila wasn't sure when she first noticed it. Maybe it was a feeling before it was a sound, a quiet sense that something inside the house had changed. She had asked Mara if she heard it. Mara had said yes, but the way she said it wasn't uncertain. It wasn't reactive. It was expected. By the time investigators arrived, the house told a story that didn't make sense. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no scattered evidence. Everything was controlled, too controlled. It didn't feel like a struggle had taken place. It felt like something had been executed, carefully. Lila sat across from the investigator, her hands resting in her lap, fingers slightly tense. She tried to retrace the night, but the details slipped the more she reached for them. Nothing had seemed wrong. Nothing had stood out. But now, everything felt uncertain. Her answers came slowly, not because she was hiding something, but because she wasn't sure what was real anymore. Behind the glass, Ethan watched, his frustration building beneath the surface. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't their life. He wanted to believe this was confusion, stress, shock, anything but what it was beginning to feel like. Then Mara sat down. The room changed, not physically, but something shifted. The air felt heavier, more controlled. She sat upright, perfectly still, her hands resting calmly in front of her. No nervous movement, no hesitation, just stillness. When asked what she heard that night, her answer came without delay. Clear, measured. She didn't describe fear. She didn't describe confusion. She described structure, a disruption, something intentional. And when the questions pushed further, she didn't resist. She redirected, as if she wasn't being questioned, but was instead observing the people questioning her. In another room, screens flickered to life, recovered footage, fragments of the night, moments captured without context. At first, it seemed ordinary, but then the patterns began to appear. A figure, standing in the hallway, still, too still. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m., but according to statements, everyone had been in their rooms. The footage didn't match the story, and the more they reviewed it, the less it made sense. Inside the briefing room, the tension grew quieter, more focused. Images lined up across the screens. Different angles, different times. Same posture, same stillness. It wasn't movement driven by reaction. It was movement driven by intention. Calculated, repeated, controlled. No one said it out loud, but the thought had already entered the room. In a smaller meeting room, the atmosphere shifted again. Less about discovery, more about doubt. The evidence was there, but it wasn't enough. Patterns pointed somewhere, but not strongly enough to hold, not enough to accuse, not enough to act. And that was the problem, because the more they looked at it, the more it pointed to something they weren't ready to accept. Through the glass, Ethan sat alone now, the weight of everything settling slowly, breaking him down in silence. Beside him, Lila sat quietly, her eyes lowered, her body slightly turned away from the room, as if she didn't want to see what was unfolding, or didn't want to understand it. And somewhere within all of it, Mara remained the only one who didn't change, didn't react, didn't break, didn't question, because while everyone else was trying to understand what had happened that night, it felt like Mara already knew. And the most unsettling part wasn't what the evidence showed. It was what it suggested. That whatever happened inside that house wasn't random, wasn't chaotic, and wasn't done by someone who lost control. It was done by someone who never lost it. The deeper the investigation went, the quieter everything became. Not calmer, just quieter. Like the house itself was holding something back. There were moments when the agents stopped talking altogether, not because they had nothing to say, but because every new detail only made things harder to explain. The timeline didn't break. It overlapped. Footage placed someone in one part of the house, while another account placed that same person somewhere else. The times were too close, too precise. There was no space for error, only contradiction. At first, they tried to explain it logically. A delay in recording, a misinterpretation of movement, human error. But the more they reviewed it, the more the explanations collapsed. The figure in the footage didn't hesitate, didn't rush, didn't react. It moved with awareness, as if it understood exactly where everyone else was at every moment. And that's when the reconstruction began. Room by room, minute by minute, they mapped out every step taken inside the house that night. Every movement, every pause, every absence. But the more complete the reconstruction became, the more impossible it looked. Because in multiple points along the timeline, someone appeared twice. Not in a way that could be dismissed, not in a way that could be ignored, but in a way that forced a question no one wanted to ask. How do you track someone when there are two of them? Lila felt it before anyone said it out loud. The shift, the way the agents looked at her now, not with suspicion, but with something else, something closer to uncertainty. She tried to hold onto what she knew, to what felt real. But the more the investigation unfolded, the more her own memory began to feel unstable. Moments she thought she understood started to feel misplaced, like something had been rearranged without her noticing. She remembered the night, the silence, the feeling, and something else, a presence, not outside the house, inside it. And slowly, something else surfaced, a memory she hadn't fully processed, because it didn't make sense at the time. She had seen Mara, that night, standing in the hallway, still, watching, but that couldn't be right, because Mara had said she was in her room, and Mara never hesitated. The psychological profile came next, not rushed, not emotional, but careful, measured. The behavioral analysis didn't describe panic, or impulse, or fear. It described control, a pattern of observation, a consistent emotional flatness, a heightened awareness of environment and response. This wasn't someone reacting to a situation. This was someone designing one. And the most unsettling part wasn't the profile itself. It was how perfectly it aligned. Mara didn't just fit the behavior. She defined it. But even then, it wasn't enough. Because suspicion isn't proof. And patterns aren't evidence. And no one was ready to cross that line. Except the silence started changing. Inside the house, things felt different. Even when no one was speaking. Even when no one was moving. Especially when Mara was alone. There was a moment, brief, unnoticed at first, when she sat by herself in the living room. No agents, no family, no one watching. The room was quiet, still, and for the first time, she moved differently. Not like before, not controlled, not observed, relaxed. Her posture shifted. Her expression changed. Not into emotion, but into something closer to awareness. She looked around the room slowly, taking everything in. Then her eyes stopped, right at the camera. Not past it, not through it, at it. And for a brief moment, it felt like she wasn't just aware of the space around her. She was aware of being watched. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. Her posture returned. Her expression flattened. Everything reset, like it never happened. Back at the FBI office, the final pieces refused to settle. The evidence was incomplete. The conclusions were unstable. And the risk was too high, because if they were right, then this wasn't just a case. It was something else entirely. Something that didn't fit within procedure, didn't follow expectation, didn't behave the way it was supposed to. And that's what made it dangerous. Ethan felt it before anyone confirmed it. The shift from confusion to something much worse. Doubt. Not about the case, not about the investigation, but about his own home, his own memory, his own daughters. Because the more he replayed everything, the more something stopped aligning. They looked the same, spoke the same, moved the same, but they weren't the same. And deep down, he had known that for a long time. He just didn't want to see it. And now, it was too late to unsee it. Because the truth wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It didn't force its way into the room. It sat quietly, in plain sight, waiting for someone to notice. And when they finally did, it didn't feel like a discovery. It felt like something that had always been there, unchanged, unbothered, watching. By the time the investigation reached its final stage, the case no longer felt like something that needed solving. It felt like something that had already revealed itself, but refused to be acknowledged. No one said Mara's name directly anymore. Not in conclusions, not in reports, not in official discussions. But she was everywhere, in every frame, every pattern, every silence. The evidence hadn't changed, but the way it was being seen had. What once looked like coincidence now looked deliberate. What once looked like gaps now looked like design. And the deeper they went, the clearer it became. This wasn't a mistake. It was precision. The decision to bring Mara in again wasn't announced. It wasn't treated like a breakthrough. It was quiet, controlled, almost reluctant. She entered the room the same way she had before. Calm, still, unchanged. Nothing about her suggested pressure. Nothing about her suggested fear. And that was the problem, because everyone else in the room felt it. The shift, the weight, the realization that this conversation wasn't going to go the way they expected. The agent across from her didn't begin with accusations, didn't push, didn't confront. He observed, because that's what she had been doing all along. He asked her about the timeline, the movements, the moments that didn't align. And she answered, not defensively, not emotionally, but precisely. Every response felt measured, carefully chosen. And yet, there was something underneath it, something just out of reach. The questions became more direct, the inconsistencies harder to ignore. And for the first time, there was a pause. Not hesitation, not confusion. A pause. Mara tilted her head slightly, just enough to feel intentional. Then she spoke, and what she said didn't confirm anything, didn't admit anything, but it changed everything. She didn't explain the timeline. She reframed it, not as something broken, but as something misunderstood. As if the problem wasn't what happened, but how they were trying to understand it. And suddenly, the investigation didn't feel like it was uncovering the truth. It felt like it had been following the wrong version of it the entire time. The room went quiet, not because there were no more questions, but because no one was sure what to ask anymore. Behind the glass, Ethan watched, and something inside him finally gave way. Not anger, not denial, recognition, because for the first time, he wasn't looking at Mara as one of his daughters. He was looking at her as something else. And the hardest part wasn't what he was seeing. It was what he had ignored. The small moments, the differences, the things that never quite felt right, but were always explained away. Until now. Because now, they weren't small anymore. They were everything. Back in the room, the agent leaned back slightly. Not defeated, but aware. Because the evidence hadn't failed. It had done exactly what it was supposed to do. It led them to the truth. The problem was, the truth didn't fit within the system designed to prove it. There was no direct action, no undeniable moment, no single piece that could stand on its own. Only patterns, precision, control. And Mara sat at the center of all of it. Untouched, unshaken, unprovable. The case didn't close. It dissolved. Quietly, officially, it remained unresolved. An incomplete sequence of events. A timeline that couldn't be fully verified. But unofficially, everyone who had worked the case carried the same understanding. They just couldn't say it. Ethan stopped coming to the station. He stopped asking questions. Stopped looking for answers. Because the answers were no longer something he could live with. Lila changed too. She became quieter. More distant, not because she didn't know what happened, but because she did, and knowing it didn't make it safer. It made it worse, because if what they believed was true, then the danger had never left the house. It had always been there, and it still was. Mara returned home. No restrictions, no charges, no conclusion, just silence. She moved through the house the same way she always had, calm, measured, normal. But now, normal didn't feel the same anymore. There was no confrontation, no final breakdown, no moment where everything was revealed. Because that moment had already happened. And it didn't come with noise. It came with realization. The kind that doesn't fade, doesn't resolve, just stays, watching. And the most unsettling part of it all wasn't that they couldn't prove what happened. It was that somewhere, deep down, they didn't need to anymore, because they already knew. And sometimes, knowing is worse than not knowing at all, because it means the truth isn't missing. It's just out of reach. And in the end, the case wasn't about what happened that night. It was about understanding something far more unsettling. What do you do when the truth is standing right in front of you, and you still can't prove it?